A few weeks back when I was in Arizona, I made a video and I talked about different measures when it comes to property taxes that passed or failed in different states across the country, because there was a lot of places that had different things on the ballot in terms of increasing property taxes or reducing property taxes, or like in North Dakota, for example, they had on the ballot to eliminate property taxes altogether. And only 36% of residents voted for it. And luckily, because I have such an amazing audience and so much reach across the country and even globally at this point, one of my viewers that lives in North Dakota wrote me an email with some reasons of why they decided to vote against this measure to actually eliminate property taxes, which I found surprising, because it's like, wow, you would think everybody would want to get rid of property taxes, right? I don't know anyone who enjoys paying their property tax bill. And of course, depending on where you live, your property taxes can be a lot higher than in other places. Here in Florida, they are quite high, which is also tied to real estate values, which is one of the reasons they are so high here. So I wanted to share with you some of the reasons that he wrote to me on why they decided to vote against this. First of all, he says that him and his wife, they own a house and they own some farmland, and they pay property taxes on both properties. And obviously the taxes are higher now than when they acquired the properties, just like it is for everybody. He says, I don't like the way property taxes are currently levied, and my immediate reaction to the scenario was to support the measure to immediately abolish property taxes in North Dakota. But he says, after reflecting, I changed my mind and I voted against it. North Dakota is a small population state composed of fiscally conservative residents, and it does not have obvious bloat to cut in terms of budget. Also, he said North Dakota is a very rural state, and so this could negatively impact more rural areas, and we'll get to those reasons in a little bit. But because North Dakota is so rural, all of the small school districts, townships, little towns, and most of the counties have almost no retail sales to allow for a sales tax on their own. So the people who live in these rural areas, they have to drive to larger cities to shop for groceries or anything else that they order, or they have to order online. And then of course, when you go to a city, you're gonna pay a city tax on top of the state sales tax. Every city usually has its own additional sales tax that they tack on top of the state sales tax. And so you're always going to pay a little bit more when you go to these cities, and obviously they need that money because more people using the infrastructure and the roads and services in the area means they need more money in order to support all of those services. So he says that the only source of revenue for these smaller entities like the school districts and small towns and things like that is property taxes, and along with the state funding that they receive from state and federal government. He says that landowners need services provided by the townships and counties, things like roads and bridges. Roads are expensive to build and maintain. Other services that are provided are things like law enforcement, animal control, and a county court system that is needed to manage the property in the county. And he says that these services should be paid for by those who benefit from them. But how if there's no property taxes? Because apparently what they wanted to do over there, they'll increase sales tax or something like that across the board, but all of the taxes then would be collected by the state and then would have to be divvied out on a first come first serve or on a as requested basis. The farmland that he owns has benefited from the services that the county and local townships provide, so shouldn't I have to pay for that? So he's being like an honest citizen and thinking like, okay, if I'm getting services from the local government, then obviously I should be responsible for paying for some of it. Makes sense. He says it's also a problem that farmland is being purchased by very rich out-of-state people who are pulling out a lot of rent money out of North Dakota. They should be contributing to this as well, but if they got rid of property taxes, then these people wouldn't have to pay anything, because supposedly they have to pay income taxes on that income. But if you're smart enough, usually you can avoid paying income taxes, especially if you're not even living in the state. So basically you can avoid the income tax, but you can't avoid property taxes. So that's another reason he voted to keep property taxes. But I think maybe this reason is probably arguably the most sensible reason to keep the property taxes, I guess. And listen, I'm not a fan of property taxes in any case, but if you're gonna come up with some reasons, I feel like this is probably one of the better ones. And so, like I said earlier, if they got rid of property taxes, then dispersing all of the sales tax money would need to be an effort made by the state government, okay? So for example, if more money is needed for bridges or roads, they would have to request the state to provide that money. But the problem is that most of the legislators are from larger cities, so they're probably not going to be too keen on handing out more money to rural areas, which comprises most of the state. And he says the way it works now is local residents decide if it's worth spending their own money depending on how great the need is and what they can afford. And this whole system would be lost if they abolished property taxes. Well, maybe, but I would think if local governments ran into this issue where they're not collecting, where they're not getting the money they need from the state, then they would probably be able to come up with something else. Like if it wasn't property taxes, they might be able to levy a new tax if the local municipalities were running dry on funds. But then of course it's not fair for those residents living there because they're paying other taxes that are going straight to the state, but they're not getting dispersed as much money as they need fairly. So I do see what he's saying here. He has a legitimate point. But he did say that using the property taxes to partially fund K-12 schools should be stopped, which I also agree, because this is where most of the fraud takes place, as we've talked about previously on the channel. And his reason is simple. He says the schools may benefit the state as a whole, but these schools don't directly benefit the property of many property owners, which is exactly true. Why should the schools be funded through property taxes? And he said this is actually one of the reasons he originally supported this measure to abolish property taxes in North Dakota, because it would also eliminate the school districts from being able to collect property tax money to fund the schools. Another reason he voted against it is because if it passed, local governments would then be on the hook for providing funding at the current level that is being funded through property taxes, which would mean that income taxes and sales taxes would have to rise substantially in order to make this happen. And then he said it wouldn't be fair for people who are just barely getting by, because people who own a property generally can afford those property taxes. I don't know what property taxes cost in North Dakota, but I would imagine it's not too expensive. But by having a much higher income tax and sales tax on everybody across the board, he believes wouldn't be as fair as keeping the system in place as it is. Now, of course, you guys can give your opinions on all this stuff down below. I personally, I'm kind of unsure about how I feel about this, because on the one hand, I don't like paying property taxes either. But he did make some real legitimate fair points here. And just like with any other political decision that needs to be made on a local level, you can never get it all, right? Like, well, we're going to eliminate property taxes, but there's going to be all these other problems that come along with it. Maybe the right answer is something like, well, let's eliminate schools from using the property tax money and lower our property taxes, and they can find a way to fund themselves on their own through a different type of tax that's more directly benefited by the people who use them. But I was very interested to hear about all this because I never thought somebody would actually reach out to me and give their reasons like, yeah, this is why I decided it's a good idea that we should continue paying property taxes. Most people always say the complete opposite and would easily abolish it in a heartbeat. But I guess sometimes when it's put to the test, as we can see, like it was in North Dakota, people still decide to keep it around. Now, if it would have happened in a state like Florida or another state where there's not as many rural residents and a lot of people do live in cities and pay really high property taxes, maybe it would have been a different thing. But also maybe not, because maybe people would also start looking at things like, where is the money going to come from if it doesn't come from property taxes? And they might not like the answer. However, the reality is property taxes have gotten far too crazy and have gotten out of control. The property tax bills across the country for most people have gone up exponentially, but the services rendered for those property taxes have not. And so that's the main issue I think people are really upset with. Now, I saw this other story today, and this is just in time for the holidays, and this is just so stupid, guys, and I can't even believe that people are asking questions like this, but I have to go over it just to make sure I clear the air on this. And here's the question. Should you use your home equity for holiday expenses? Yeah, we're really sinking to new all-time lows here when it comes to personal finances and financial education with questions like this. And I'm not trying to talk down on anybody, but this is just extremely stupid, okay? It really is. Anybody who's thinking about doing this and borrowing against their house, they can buy Christmas presents or throw a Christmas party or whatever it is, they should not even be considering that. But here's why people are considering it, because according to a new survey from Bankrate, the 2024 holiday shopping survey found that 28% of holiday shoppers say they are stressed out about the cost of their holiday shopping and how much it's going to strain their budget. More than a quarter of people plan on taking on some form of debt in order to pay for their spending. And the fact that people are even considering taking a home equity line of credit or a home equity loan out to pay for these things is just outrageous. It really is. And you know what the number one justification for this is? People say, well, the HELOC rates and the home equity loan rates are much lower than credit card rates. So their justification is, I'm going to pay less interest if I borrow the money against my house than if I put it on the credit card, because I can't pay off the credit card right away. So I'm going to, in the end, pay more. Now, I will say, just from that point of view alone, if you're only looking at the interest rate, I get what they're saying. I understand the logic, but it's still stupid. And here's why. The reason is because now your holiday shopping spending spree and all the debt that you accumulated during that time is now tied to your house. And if you don't pay off that debt, if something else happens in your life where you just for some reason can't pay it off, well, now you're in big trouble, because now you're going to lose your house over buying Christmas presents. But people just don't know when to quit. According to PwC's 2024 Holiday Outlook survey, it predicts that holiday spending will increase 7% per shopper at an average rate of about $1,638 this year in 2024. The National Retail Federation, they're predicting a much lower number, $902 per person across everything: gifts, food, decorations, all of it. But then you have 29% of Americans planning on taking debt for their holiday travel plans. 55% of people also said they can't resist the holiday sales, that they see things that they weren't even planning on buying, but because it's on sale, they buy it anyways, and then the perceived savings ends up making them spend more money than they were even planning on spending. So that's more than half of people that are falling into that mental doom loop when it comes to holiday shopping. Now, I'm guilty too, guys. I just spent a bunch of money for Black Friday, okay? But it's all stuff I needed. It wasn't things I wasn't planning on buying anyways. I was gonna buy all this stuff, and I'm just waiting for the best deal. So to me, that just makes the most sense. If you're gonna buy it anyways, you might as well get the best possible deal. And so that's what I did. So the people who are asking this question, not really a huge surprise, are younger homeowners in particular, because younger homeowners are apparently more willing to tap home equity for more discretionary purchases, which I didn't know that, but now that I do know that, please don't. Stop making our generation look bad. About 23% of millennial homeowners thought that keeping up with regular household bills was a good reason to use equity for cash. And 14% said it's okay to tap equity for a vacation. Or 11% said it's okay to tap equity for buying big ticket non-essential items. Just don't forget, guys, that no matter what you use your home equity for, when you get that cash and you go and spend it, your house is now on the line. If for whatever reason something happens, your car breaks down and you need to buy a new car, it's a total loss for some reason, or you have a medical emergency and you need money for that, and for some reason you can't pay, your house is going to go into foreclosure over this. It's also not a very practical way to borrow either, because it takes time to get one of these loans. It's not like you can just get it 1, 2, 3. There's a lot of paperwork and applications involved. A lot of people take on these petty loans, like a $5,000 or $10,000 HELOC or home equity loan, and you're gonna put your house on the line for something that trivial? You know, if you're going to be borrowing like this, you might as well at least use credit cards or buy now, pay later, which I am not in favor for. But if you're going to borrow anyways, and there's nothing that I can say or anybody else can say to change your mind, then at least do yourself a favor and take on debt that's not going to be attached to where you live. So if you default, then you're still going to have a place to live. You might have bad credit, you might have to go through a bankruptcy and have that hanging over your head for years to come, but at least you won't be homeless. And anybody who wants to wisen up when it comes to purchasing a house because homes have gotten so expensive, take a look at this, guys. I found this, which I thought was extremely interesting. And obviously this has been happening for a while, but when you see what you can get for the money when you buy a prefab tiny home from Amazon, the results are actually pretty stunning. You got median home prices in the country right now hovering around $420,000, $430,000. You can go over to Amazon right now and you can buy this tiny home, this 2-story home with picture windows and a balcony. It's 40 feet long by 20 feet wide. The floor plan can be customized. There's tons of windows. There's a fireplace, spiral staircase, which I hate, but some people like it. And it comes with the lighting, the heating, the air conditioning, everything already pre-wired and ready to go. You can get this place for $48,000. They sell another one, which is a container type home, which is 40 by 20 feet. I mean, the picture of this place looks awesome. I actually like this better than the first one, and it's cheaper. And this place only sells for $37,000. So for $37,000, you can get a house like this that supposedly is easy to assemble. I don't know what that means. I don't know if you really need to have professional help or not. Really what you need to do is just find a plot of land that you can build this tiny house on. It's not like one of those mobile tiny homes where you can, you know, put it up on wheels and move it to another site. But these houses look incredible for that price. And anybody who needs an affordable place to live should be looking at a solution like this over something like moving into a mobile home community, for example, where you have to buy the mobile home and then rent the land. I talked about this the other day in a video, and people are getting kicked out left and right who are in this situation. So if you buy your own piece of land and put a $37,000 house on it, that's a tremendous deal, and you're never gonna have to worry about being kicked out. Anybody who's interested in this type of thing, I'll put the links down below for these tiny homes so you guys can take a look. One other thing I find very interesting right now is a recent survey by the National Association of Realtors just showed that 1/5 of people just bought a house in the Midwest. 1/5 of all home sales just happened in the Midwest, guys, where people are buying affordable homes, where there's jobs, and it's a more laid back environment. And I grew up in the Midwest, and it is nice, okay? But it also isn't, depending on what kind of lifestyle you're looking for. If you're fine with 6 months of winter, then the Midwest is okay. And some people can look past that for a lot of different reasons. For me, it actually took a mental toll on me. You know, look at me. I move around through half of the year, stay here, and now I'm going to California just to be able to chase the best weather, guys. Like, one thing I have found out as I've gotten older is the number one thing that matters to me more than almost anything is having a nice climate. Being in a preferable climate for me changes my mood, it changes how productive I am, it changes how optimistic I feel about life. Like, it really has a big impact. Other people, it doesn't faze them as much. But since I'm aware that that's the situation for me, I use that knowledge and I move around as needed. But a lot of people are choosing the Midwest because this is a very appealing option compared to all these coastal cities that are just completely unaffordable now. People are moving to places like Kansas City, you know, Columbus, Ohio. You also have a lot of people who are moving back to the Midwest who are from the Midwest, like me. You know, I've considered doing this before, and I'll tell you one thing. If I did move back to the Midwest, it wouldn't be back to Illinois. And the reason is because Illinois is one of the worst states when it comes to property taxes, like we were talking about earlier. In fact, you're going to pay more in property taxes in a state like Illinois than you pay here in Florida for a lower priced home. And on top of that, they have state income taxes there. So it would be like living in California in terms of taxes, but not getting any of the benefits or perks of living in California. So if I was willing to pay those taxes now as an adult, I might as well move to California. At least I will be able to live the lifestyle I wanted to live. But one thing I do miss about the Midwest is the general friendly atmosphere, and definitely the affordability is nice too. It's nice to be able to just not have to spend a lot of money on housing or going out to eat and things like that. In fact, a quarter of these people who recently bought actually used to live in the Midwest, moved somewhere else, and then are now moving back. A lot of them moved back for family and friends, being close to them as they raise their families and stuff like that, which makes perfect sense too. And you know, the best thing in these places too is you can have a household income of $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year and afford a nice home over there. And the Midwest is also likely to maintain affordability into the future because there's a lot of empty land. Let's face it, there's a lot of places where they can still build houses. In fact, I saw that when I was in the Midwest this past summer, and there's no shortage of places to build. So if they need more housing, they just build it over there. It's not like one of those big speculative markets like here in Miami where people come from all over the world and dump all this excess cash that they have into the real estate market and drives up prices through the roof. That doesn't really happen in the Midwest, so prices are pretty much limited in most cases to what the locals can afford and what they make. So if you just want stability in your life, and knowing for sure you're going to be able to predict what my payment is going to be on something next month or next year, the Midwest really can't be beaten. That's the kind of thing I miss about it, is the predictability. When I went back to Illinois, I haven't been there in 3 years, and I was there in June. It's like nothing changes, guys. Everything's the same, except things are more run down now, especially in Rockford and Belvedere, the area where I'm from. I showed you guys the Cherryvale Mall over there. That's like half empty now. All these stores in there are closed down and nobody's in there. Like, that place used to be bustling when I was a kid. So things have definitely gone downhill in certain areas, but that doesn't reflect the entire Midwest. There are places you can move there that are doing well. After my experience in different places in the Midwest, I think like a mid-sized city would be a good place to live over there. Like, think about like Indianapolis or like Des Moines, Iowa, places like that, where you still have just enough amenities and enough things to do around and good restaurants and stuff like that, but without completely breaking the bank, I think is the nice mix of the Midwest. Or you could buy a super cheap piece of land and put one of these $37,000 Amazon houses on it and be all in on your property for like $50K, which would be another nice perk of moving to the Midwest. Anyways, I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Don't spend too much money on Black Friday. Please don't borrow against your house in order to buy Christmas presents. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.